guys. Welcome to Addictive Personalities. My name is Bethany, and this podcast is based on lived experience, not professional advice. We're talking all things addiction, mental health, trauma, and healing, and everything in between. Please be mindful of where you are in your own journey, as some content may be triggering. This is a safe space without judgment, a space where raw honesty is celebrated. So if you're here, let's get after it. Hey guys, welcome back. Let's reflect on what we've already discussed. So, in this boundaries series, we've talked about how important boundaries have been in my life post addiction, and how even though I became clean, I still didn't actually recognize the need for healing until I realized that I wasn't living. So in part one, it was just a very high level explanation of like boundaries and how they relate to my experience and when I became aware of what they were. And then in part two, we talked about what boundaries are not. And then in part three, we talked about how we can't expect people to consider our own boundaries if we don't also respect theirs, and how doing that actually starts training your brain to be more aware and give you that voice and self-worth and self-respect. Because when you can give respect, it feels more natural when you receive it, and you can recognize when you're receiving it and when you're not. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how we can apply these in a realistic way, starting small, having those little wins. I mean, I've given you a lot of examples, right? And I've also warned towards not jumping into like your most toxic relationships where you wish you had the most control, and in the relationships where there's the most potential for drama or even injury. We don't want that. This doesn't apply to people who are in abusive relationships. If you're in an abusive relationship, your boundary should be leaving. But even that is not as simple as just me saying leave, right? So I definitely would not suggest practicing boundary creating in toxic and abusive situations. So when we start small, that starts to lay a groundwork in your perception of yourself and teaches your brain that the small wins matter, and that through success that you can do it. And in doing these in small, low stakes environments, you are doing the boundary setting safely without traumatizing yourself or completely blowing up relationships. So this episode is about low stakes reps and nervous system safety. I don't know how much people really talk about the nervous system either. I think that deserves its own episode because of all the damage we've done to our central nervous system. And so this is really also about regulating. So if you did listen to the last few episodes and you're thinking, okay, cool, like I get it, boundaries, yeah, makes sense, but I don't even know where to start, this is the episode that's for you. If you've been waiting for like, okay, yeah, but now what, right? Because the problem is not that you don't understand boundaries. It's just that you're starting at the wrong level. So if you've been trying to create boundaries, first of all, it takes practice, and it takes intention, and it takes courage, and it takes discipline. So it's not uncommon that people who are in post-addiction will sabotage boundaries. It's your nervous system, and your nervous system doesn't care about logic. It cares about survival. So when you try to set a boundary in a high-stakes emotional situation right out of the gate, your body will panic. And panic can show up in ways like you over-explaining or trying to justify what you're asking for, or even, walking it back, or completely just freezing, or sometimes being already on the defensive because you already think that like it's not going to turn out okay. So your reaction is actually probably really going to be intense because you're already expecting failure. So a lot of times it might end up with an explosion, or you give up and say, you know what, never mind. This whole boundary thing isn't for me. It's not for me. I'm good, because it's hard. They do work. I promise you. And I tend to like never leave my house pretty much. And so I don't have a whole ton of opportunities to create boundaries. And I think that boundary creating, it never ends. Throughout our lives, we're going to have to create boundaries with our kids. We're going to have to teach them about boundaries with their friends. We're going to have to, interact with people at work and create boundaries with them. And there are other situations where like we just want to make sure that when we are showing ourselves, we're also showing where we stand with ourselves, what we value. And there are things that are so valuable, like time, energy, and you can't get those things back. So it's very, very important that we all work on ways in which we can make the most out of those two things at least. That's our time and our energy. So when we're working on this post-addiction and we're talking about having gone through so much nervous system damage, when we think we're creating boundary and we realize we're not that good at it, it's just that we just tried to lift weight that we haven't trained for yet. So we're just jumping in too quickly, too excitedly, too confidently, and in the situations where there's the most to lose. So it's the most scary, most risky. And that's why I'm suggesting it's best that we really start with low stakes, easy wins. So I know I shared the boundary that I created with my daughter's dad, but again, it did come to a point where it's like, okay, I'm noticing that like my own well-being is being neglected. Like my nervous system was reacting and it was affecting my relationship everywhere. I mean, it was just even the thought of knowing that he was coming to visit would send me in a spiral for multiple days beforehand. And I would have to like basically de-stash all of that stress afterwards as well, because it was very exhausting. So do not start with people who hurt you the most. I don't care really how badly you want to draw a line with your mom or your ex or that friend who drains the life out of you. That comes later. That comes with practice. If you struggle with creating boundaries, of course. If this is new for you, I just recommend that you don't start like that. I didn't just start with my daughter's dad. So right now, we're training your system to experience what it's like to be successful without complete destruction or collapse. So even though these sound small, these low stakes boundaries actually really do count. And them being small is actually the point. These are supposed to be feasible, viable, low risk, low drama, simple statements. So if you're at a party or at a friend's house, at a family dinner, a boundary can be leaving when you're tired, not when it's like the quote unquote right time to go or when it's time to be kicked out, If you're tired and you're ready to go, you can 100% leave and not worry about who's going to feel what. If you need to protect your energy, that's a perfect place to start. Also, not answering a text immediately. There's a lot of power in that. We often feel like we are heavily accessed by multiple people whenever they want. I remember in the days of beepers where it's like, okay, well, I can only call you when I get to a payphone, and I just can't imagine what it's like being a kid and not understanding that like a cell phone is literally not a gateway to me. It is actually supposed to be a tool to make things easier for me, not make me accessible. You don't have to answer a call or text if you don't have the energy or even the words. And actually, I really recommend, especially if we're dealing with toxic relationships, that if there is a huge long text exchange and it's heated, that both parties just stop. Don't text. Think. Because written words cannot be taken back. So anyway, my point is that you don't have to answer a text right away just because someone texts you. That is a small little boundary. And when you realize that not everybody is going to flip out, that's a small win. Or another way that you can set a boundary is actually saying, I'm not available. If you're invited somewhere, and you don't have to explain why. You don't have to give an excuse. Like, oh, well, I actually have this thing, or I'm, whatever it is. You don't have to give an explanation. If someone asks you if you can be somewhere and you say you're not available, that should be the end of it. That is a way that you can set a boundary. It's not necessarily setting a boundary with that person. It's just setting a boundary with yourself that is allowing you the right and the ability to say no and not feel guilty. It can also be something like just ending a conversation that ends up turning disrespectful. And it doesn't even have to be a mean response. Just be like, you know what? Honestly, I cannot continue this conversation. I need a minute. And you can walk away or hang up the phone or whatever it is. Hanging up on people is not actually a healthy way to create a boundary, because you're only saying that you're being irrational and you can't control your reaction. When you set a boundary in a healthy way, it's done in a calm manner because you recognize it for what it is and you're stopping it from invading your state of being. And then a final example would just be similar to what I just said, is choosing not to engage when you feel yourself getting reactive. And I've mentioned this before. My body tells me all I need to know about how the next 10 minutes are going to be. And if I choose to speak during that 10-minute window, instead of trying to regulate myself, there will be mistakes and there will be damage. Your body, especially for those of us who've been through trauma and are triggered, our body tells us everything we need to know. And the worst thing we can do is react when we're in that state. So not only are you creating a boundary with somebody else, and it could be, a friend, it can be, I think the problem is that we've, in some cases, become used to feeling responsible for how everybody else feels. But how can we be responsible for how other people feel if we can't even take responsibility for our own feelings, right? So if you are continuing to do something that makes you uncomfortable, whose fault is that? Who is accountable for that? The moment you feel yourself being uncomfortable doing something is the same moment you have a choice to continue doing that or to discontinue doing that. And if you don't want to be at someone's house later than 8 p.m., even though they might be doing board games till 10, it is absolutely within your right and not rude to excuse yourself and go home. Every time you do this and nothing catastrophic happens, your brain will log a new truth. And the truth is that you can protect yourself and survive the discomfort. And that is how self-worth shows up, not as confidence, but as self-trust. We've lived lives for so long where we didn't trust anyone around us or ourselves because every decision that we made turned into some kind of, crazy, 3-day misadventure. We have to now build that memory of a new way of existing. And that's why initially I wanted this podcast to be, a lot of storytelling. And I think I want to do more storytelling because I have incredible stories, crazy stories that will make me look wackadoo. But I have a hard time remembering those because I've started to retrain my brain in a different way where everything is way less dramatic, way less exciting. And I think that some of us overcompensate in that way. That'll be in an upcoming episode about bed rot because that's what I feel like I do as a way of coping. But anyway, there's a moment, it's quiet, but it's powerful after you hold a boundary. And it's when you realize you didn't abandon yourself, you didn't implode, you didn't need permission, you handled it. And more than likely, nobody flipped out. Everything still exists just as it did. And that feeling, that's self-worth being rebuilt behaviorally, not intellectually, but with proof and evidence. You don't earn self-respect by lecturing yourself into it. I won't teach you self-respect by lecturing you. You do earn it by doing what you said you would do. You start small, you collect wins, let the evidence build, And in the next episode, we're going to talk about why boundaries feel so fucking uncomfortable and why that doesn't mean you're wrong. It actually means you're healing. If something in this episode felt a little too familiar, don't brush past that. That's where the work starts. Healing isn't about having all the answers, it's about being willing to look at what's real. If you're in that space, stay with me. Follow, share, or come back when you're ready. This is Addictive Personalities.